Well, it's another Monday morning, and I hope you guys are going to have a really great week this week. Hope we all have a great week, as we all got stuff we need to do. And I'm going to jump into the few photos. This is largely some interesting photos and some test questions, if you like test questions. These clock springs, I had a student one time that I had taught them all about centering clock springs before you put them on, and when you're putting a new clock spring on, the new ones usually come with a little peg that's holding them in the center, and you're supposed to have the steering wheel in the center when you change them out and all that, because they'll only turn about 2 3/4 turns in each direction even when they're centered. That's, they're designed for that. If you put one in there that's already all the way wound up and you try to turn it farther than it can turn, it rips it all to shreds. And one of my students had a Honda car. He had replaced the rack on it. And whenever he replaced that rack, he had the steering wheel, either the rack was turned all the way one way or something. I don't know what happened, but he didn't calculate the fact that the steering wheel was already all the way in one direction, and when he put the rack on there, as soon as he turned the wheel, he destroyed his clock spring. And on that Honda Accord at the time, that clock spring was like $400. I'm just glad it was his own car he was working on and not a customer's car. But I mean, I didn't take any joy in that, but he learned something he never forgot, and he's a professional technician today. Alright, so question 1. The in-tank electric fuel pump on a vehicle can be heard for 2 seconds at key on, but the engine won't start. The fuel gauge shows a full tank. Fuel pump current draw is 6 amps. Which of the following is the least likely to be the cause? An empty fuel tank, water in the fuel tank, clogged fuel injectors, fuel fouled spark plugs. The answers will be at the end, by the way. I had seen that one vehicle where somebody had used a cheap plastic hose tee on a 2008 Jeep Commander that had, this is actually that tee, and it had cracked and it had dumped a bunch of coolant. And you can see how whenever they tightened the clamp, how it caved the plastic in. This tee was not designed for what they were using it for. It couldn't handle the heat. It could handle some pressure, I guess, but not the heat. And it basically cracked and came apart. However, the plastic stuff that they use on just about every car now has got coolant flowing through plastic. And that plastic is a problem when you're not talking about hot coolant. The radiator tanks are plastic. And how many of you guys that work in this industry have seen radiator tanks split while somebody was driving down the road and destroy the engine? The little, on some of those 3.8 liters, the belt tensioner, for some strange reason, they put the coolant flowing through that through some little plastic elbows that had O-rings on them. And the parts house has replacement parts that are aluminum or steel, typically. But ever since, my gosh, sometime in the late 80s, they've been using all kinds of plastic carrying hot coolant. And over a period of time, that plastic's going to fail and they're going to lose the coolant. There was General Motors on some of their platforms were using plastic engine oil pans for a little bit. They got away from that. It didn't take very long, like a year or two. They were done with that and went back to aluminum or stamped steel or whatever. Now this right here was the CRX job I've talked about a little bit. The reason I put that in here, I found the picture of them actually changing out the engine in that CRX. And it was an SI with a fancy, 1.6 liter engine and all that. And he had crashed it, flipped it over. The engine was still good in his car. And he got this car that had a bad engine in it, and we had to pull it was a beautiful little car, and we had to pull the motor out of this one and put this one in it. Well, we ran into a little bit of an issue here because this one was 1.6 liter MPI, and this is 1.5 liter TBI. That's the one that the donor car came with this. But the crashed car had this in it. And so I asked my students, I said, what are we going to do? I said, we've got 2 different fuel injection systems. Now, as far as the block itself and all that, it was identical. other than, you know, this one here was a Trocton board, a little more or whatever. I could have looked that up. But the long and the short of it was, they were saying, oh, we're going to have to take the engine controller out of this car and all the wire harnesses and put it in this car. Well, no, we need to work smart, not hard. And so what we basically did was we disconnected the, you know, we've got this motor at, whenever we pull this one out, we disconnected the intake and the exhaust, pulled them off the engine completely, and lifted this out of there as a long block. And this one here, we just took those out, and there was room in that engine compartment where we could just lay them back out of the way. And when we rode, as I remember, but I do know that we just used this as a long block, and we dropped it in here where this one was and bolted everything up. It was perfect. He had a 1.6, but he had this kind of fuel injection instead of the multi-point, and that worked out really well. I think his total bill at the end of that job was something like $400. He actually provided the donor car. So, you know, a lot of the times you have to, you know, get a donor engine, an engine from a donor car, and put it in a car. This time he provided a replacement car, and we pulled the engine out of the wrecked car. Anyway, that was a fun job. Now that was an '88 model, and yeah, I know it's kind of old, but people love their cars, you know. In question 2, an engine's running at 243 degrees. The cooling system is full of clean coolant. The air conditioner's off. The fans come on at 220 degrees and never go off. Both heater hoses are cool to the touch. What's most likely to be the problem? A stuck open thermostat, faulty water pump, too much radiator heat transfer, or too much EGR flow? Okay, I used to see these where people had driven through lots and lots of muddy creeks and stuff, and that mud would get all caked up inside there, and it would make noise, and it would grind the shoes away, you know, the lining off the shoes, and it was just a big mess. And whether you've got this or whether you've got dust that's accumulated, the black brake dust, which you can also call squealing, if you're getting rid of that black brake dust, you better use something wet to get it off of there. Don't blow it with air. I had this one student, one of the first classes I ever taught when I went to the college. We were going to do brakes that day, and I told my students very plainly, I said, well, we're going to do some brakes. You're going to pull brake drums off. You're going to see black brake dust all over those shoes. And it's just, and I says, what you don't do, do not take an air hose and blow that dust off those brakes, because it floats in the air. Mesothelioma is no fun. It's like smoking 10,000 cigarettes without a single bit of pleasure to go with it. And I said, so don't do that. And there was a guy that was in his 40s that seemed pretty intelligent. And as soon as we left the classroom and he pulled the tires and the brake drum off one, he used an air hose and he blew the brake dust off of those shoes. And I was thinking, what in the world were you thinking, and why didn't you pay attention in class? I said, don't do this. They have a special, we had actually a washer thing that you could, you know, actually roll it over here, and it had a little pump, and you could use this brush with water, with solvent coming out, and it would catch all of that, and then they would come, Safety Clean would come swap this thing out. I got tired of that because it wasn't really necessary. You can use a drain pen, and you can spray this with some kind of, you know, 409 water, whatever you want to spray. It's best to be soapy, and then rinse it off, you know, with pour some water over it into your drain pan or whatever. Don't let that dust get into your lungs. Don't let it get into the air. But this one right here wasn't dust, it was mud. And so it's a good idea to wash this one first, just to get all this junk out of your way. But that was a muddy mess. This one here, as I remember, had also been driven enough in the mud where the park brake cables were all seized up because they were rusting. We had to replace the park brake cables and everything on this. All right. Next, I've got a video, so I'm going to stop talking while you listen to the video. All right, we're going to... Give us some gas. Give us some gas. All right, that's exhaust back pressure. It's not supposed to look like that, is it? It's not good enough. You might notice that even idling, that Buick had 2 pounds of back pressure. And I used this homemade thing I've talked about a lot on here, where you take a brake bleeder valve, and 18 millimeter plug that's supposed to go where an oxygen sensor goes. Put it in place of the oxygen sensor, put a hose on it to your plain old cheap vacuum gauge, and you can read back pressure that way. But I'll tell you what, that is one of the clearest examples of a go, no-go test. If you see, you shouldn't see any back pressure at all there. If you even see 1 psi, it's suspect. I've seen 5 psi, you know, that the car would still run. The guy just said it didn't quite feel like it should. It was on a Trailblazer, I think. And I said, whenever we checked it, it had 5 psi of exhaust back pressure. And I said, well, we need to pull that catalyst off and look at it. When we did, it was completely clogged up, almost. And it was amazing to me the car still run as good as it did, and he only had 5 psi of back pressure. But that's a great test for figuring out if your cat's plugged without having to do anything except remove an oxygen sensor. Sometimes the oxygen sensor is hard to get to, but you always want to remove the one that's right in front of the cat and put the gauge right there. Question 3. A voltage reading across the power and ground terminals of the blower motor indicates 6 volts even when the blower switch is placed in a high speed position. All the following are possible causes of this issue except A. Faulty blower relay, B. Ground circuit resistance, C. Resistance on the B plus side, or D. A faulty blower motor. The blower motor here is the one that came out of the car. Which way is it turning? Let go of it, Joe. All right, it's going that way. Now hook this new one up. It's made in China. Wonderful. I don't care if it does have the VDO name on it. Now, let go. All right, now notice that it's turning the opposite direction. It's turning this way. Do it again. Okay. Now that will make the car not have any air hardly at all coming out of the blower, and so we got to replace the blower motor on this one again with one hopefully that's wired up right this time. Now the other blower motor was noisy, and that's why we were replacing it. And whenever we put the new blower motor in there and turned on the fan, the blower sounded really loud, but there was almost no airflow at the register. And so what happened, they put these magnets in there backwards is what happened when they built it, and it caused it to spin the wrong way. Occasionally you see this kind of thing. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does. One of the things I used to do is plant a bug on my trainer cars was I would reverse the polarity of the blower, and I would give them like a work order saying that the fan's loud but it doesn't move any air, and I'd let them try to figure that out without, you know, just logically figure out what was going on. Now this is a Buick that I saw at the local place where I would eat, Doc Country Store. This isn't the country store where I ate this, nor is this. It was inside. That building was over here. But the point is, look how good these tires are. These are really nice tires. And those tires right there are kind of worn out. But the whole side of that car got sideswiped by something. I don't know what it was. And you know this guy's got wind noise and it leaks when it rains and the trunk won't close. I changed that license plate number, which I always do when I'm showing a license plate. But this was wacky that somebody would still drive this car as long as nothing. See, that looks to me like they had beat the fender up out of the way so it wouldn't touch the wheel. Probably did that on the front too. But they just kept on driving it. And I showed this to a friend of mine a couple of days ago when I was building this PowerPoint. He says, I can just about guarantee you those people are debt free, but the doggone thing still runs even though it looks like it's been through a war. Now this is something that I thought was funny back whenever my boys were young teenagers, you know, they're in their 40s now. I would teach them using batteries and motors and all kinds of stuff about LEDs and whatnot. And one time I got this speed sensor that I had brought from work. It was an old one, and I fixed it where we could connect an LED to the 2 terminals on the speed sensor, and because it produces alternating current, you could spin that and this light would come on as long as you were keeping this shaft turning. And my son Matt said, well, why don't we get an electric motor and connect it to this and then hook a battery to the motor and let the motor spin this so the light's burning all the time. And I said, well, why don't we just connect the battery to the LED using a resistor? But see, the thing about it is, this was a teaching experience, and sometimes you go above and beyond and put extra hardware in there for teaching so that they can learn not only about the LED, but they're also learning about this, and they're learning about the motor and how to wire it up and all that kind of thing. So that's just taught those guys that. Of course, my oldest son, because I had taught him about that, and he worked at a tire store for 3 or 4 years right after he got out of high school and all that, he went to take his ASVAB test at the state capitol to see if, because he was looking at getting into the Navy, and he made the highest score on his ASVAB test that anybody has ever made in this state, and that got him into the nuclear program. And a lot of it was stuff that I taught him about electronics when he was growing up, and stuff he learned about hydraulics. And I mean, these questions that they asked him on that ASVAB test basically revealed his electrical and mechanical knowledge, and that's why he scored as high as he did. All right, now question 4. An engine is idling very rough all the time on cold start. The intake gets very hot within 60 seconds. In other words, if you put your hand on it, you have to pull your hand off. What's the most likely cause? Clogged up radiator, lean air fuel mixture, EGR valve stuck open, or water pump cavitation? Repairs are needed here. You can see people keep trying to run the air conditioner where the compressor's locked up. This thing will get smoking hot, and this basically you're going to have a compressor and probably a whole bunch of flushing going on and replace the accumulator and the orifice or the dryer if it's got one of those on it. Anyway, I thought that was a dynamic video of that smoking AC clutch. Square body trucks have character. Now look at this guy here. This is original. These are the original hubcaps on this GMC truck. It's been really, the paint's, it's got a little sag like you'd expect from an old Chevrolet. Chevrolets tend to have frames that will do that. But this one here, I really like this classy truck. He's got good tires on it. He's got these homemade running boards like you used to see on a lot of trucks back in the day. This headache rack's pretty nice. He probably bought that not long ago. And he got a toolbox on there. And you notice he's got his lumber, instead of it sticking out the back where he has to put a red flag on it, he's got the lumber propped up on the headache rack, which is really handy. You just got to make sure you don't go through something this is shorter than this. But that, I thought, was a very cool looking old square body GMC truck. And whatever you look at on the, they started making those in '73 is when that body style came out. And it stayed around for a long time. They changed the grille and the headlights a little bit, one thing and another. But '73 is when they first started making this basic design. And you can buy tail lights and stuff for these things, and at the parts store. They sell a lot of that stuff now for the old vehicles. Question 5. A lean air fuel mixture bums. What in the world did I do that for? It's supposed to be burns. That's dumb. Why did I put bums there? Anyway, cold and fast, hot and slow, or cold and slow. This method of keeping up with the tools at the college worked better than anything else I did, and I was there for nearly 20 years, and I tried a lot of different ways for the students to keep the tools in order. Of course, we had some dedicated toolbox for that was a scan toolbox. This was the toolbox that was dedicated tool sets for the high dual enrollment students. But I would have multiple sizes of each wrench hanging on these long hooks, and then it's just really worked good because I had them all labeled. Painting the shape of the tool is okay, and that works pretty good, but I didn't take the time to do that. However, I did put a little sticker saying which size socket went where, and you can obviously tell the hacksaw went on those 2 hooks and all that, and the screwdrivers went along the bottom. But the students tended to put these up here on the right pegs. Now, I had a big toolbox over here you can't see on the end, and I would spend 2 or 3 days at the beginning of the semester putting all those tools in perfect order, all the sockets like they were supposed to be. I had the rails bolted down in there, and everything was in perfect order. And within 2 days of those students coming and starting work in the shop, that thing looked like a tornado ate it. It was just ridiculous. It didn't take very long but this one vendor lady that was coming around selling industrial stuff gave me these peg boards 4 pegboards, and all of these red pegs had originally come off a Snap-on truck eons before. Previous instructor had bought a lot of them, and I used those free pegboards and those pegs that I already had on hand to set this up, and I never had anything work better. Now when I retired, the guy that came after me, he's a different guy than the guy that's there now because he didn't last long. But the first thing he did when he came to work there and became the automotive instructor was he yanked all of this stuff off the wall and threw those tools in a pile over there on the floor, and dumped all the tools out of the big toolbox at the end of the tool crib. I mean, it was just a mess, and it took. I don't think he ever got that mess straightened out. He was there for a couple of years, but anyway, this worked for me, and it took me a long time to come up with that system. But I can understand why a new instructor would want to remake the thing in his own image. If I was going to a place where everything was set up and working, I would leave it alone until I slowly came up with a better way. On the opposite side of this, I had a special shelf the welders built me that held most all these clamshell boxes, and they were all labeled too, so you could tell he put all that stuff in and got rid of those shelves the welders built. There's all kinds of stuff he did that I was thinking, what did he do this for? Now this new pump was assembled wrong when it was built. You see these right here, it's 120 degrees out. See that? They put this new pump together, and this should have been turned around over there so that so that this was sticking out like that was. Everything else was the same on that, pretty much. You see? Well, this is turned a little bit different from that one, but not much. You see, there's your fuel tank pressure sensor, and when they tried to put that in there, it wouldn't fit. Wouldn't work. Couldn't get it to go down in there because this was in the wrong place and all that. So when you pull it out and compare it to the other pump, you can tell that they put it together wrong. We just sent it back and got the right, got the pump that was put together right though. Question 6. Which of the following are the members of a planetary gear set? Spur cut gear, helical cut gear, sun gear, planetary gear, ring gear, Simpson gear, Reveno gear, pinion gear, internal gear, spur cut gear, Annulus gear. Alright. This vehicle would not move after they reinstalled the valve body, and they had this valve body off of this thing several times, and they put it back together, and this was they had to take it out. We wound up having to replace all the solenoids on the valve body to get it completely straightened out, even though they measured okay and all that. If those things look like they've been a little hot, cooked around the side, it's the best idea to throw a set of solenoids on it. It cost about $300. Seems to me like this may have been on a Taurus or something, but the long and the short of it is they were in such a hurry when they put it back together that they didn't put this where it was supposed to go in that slot, and this manual valve wouldn't move. When you operate the shifter, it was just moving this, but the manual valve was completely out of place, and so that was the deal on that. This other guy that I had is working on his own transmission. He pulled a valve body out, and somehow, man, he managed to drop the valve body. I couldn't believe he did that, and it was his own truck. And he bent this, and so we had to get him another manual valve. I had the manual valve from his truck laid on my desk for a long time, so I could show it to people. But what does this component do? Now, I didn't include this as one of my questions, my test questions, but all you have to do is look at this and think about it. Now, VCT stands for variable cam timing. There's helical gears in here that move in and out, and that's what varies the exhaust valve. This is the exhaust camshaft, the only one that has variable cam timing. This is like a 2000 model Escort, and this valve, this solenoid, is actually what delivers oil to that variable cam timing setup. But I used to open the hood on these vehicles when I had new students that hadn't ever been under the hood of a car very much, and I would make them identify components. I'd basically say, what's that, what's this, what's that. I'd point around all this stuff, and that was a really good exercise that I put them through, and they really seemed to do well. Alright, watch this. fill in the blank. Now, I didn't speed that video up. I didn't slow it down. What's the most likely cause of this? Fill in the blank. Some of you guys probably know off the top of your head. Now, here's the answers to the test questions. This isn't the least likely cause. Remember, this is like those ASE questions. An empty fuel tank is the least likely cause. Why? Because the fuel pump is pulling 6.2 amps. If it was only pulling like 1.5 amps, the tank would be empty. Because a fuel pump will pull more current when it's pumping fuel than it will when it's not. Water in the fuel tank would not cause this to be, it can cause it not to start, but you still have this. Clogged fuel injectors, not likely to be the cause. Fuel foul spark plugs, not likely to be the cause. But they could be. But the least likely is what we're looking for. The least likely would be an empty fuel tank. You could have that, you could have this, you could have that. That's not going to be the issue. Even if it's got the wrong stuff in it, it's not empty. Alright. Question 2. Engine's running at 243. This is a faulty water pump. We know this because, well, the fan comes on and never goes off, but it's full of clean coolant. Air has been burped out and everything. Air conditioner's not running. When they come on at 220, of course, a lot of them GM cars, they come on at 228, which scares the daylights out of it if you think about it. Both heater hoses are cool to the touch. So that's telling me that you got a faulty water pump, like the cavitation on the reaction surface or the impeller itself. So. Voltage reading across the power and ground terminals indicates 6 volts even when the blower switch is placed in the high-speed position. All the following are possible causes, except a faulty blower motor. If the blower motor is only going to run as fast as it gets voltage to do, a faulty blower relay can drop voltage. Ground circuit resistance can drop voltage. Resistance on the B plus side. See, on your high blow, you should have a full 12 volts with that blower running wide open. But if a faulty blower motor is not going to be what's wrong here. Engine idling rough all the time. On cold start, the intake gets very hot within 60 seconds. That is an EGR valve stuck open. Now, one time in my entire career, I saw an intake getting hot like that on it was an 85 Oldsmobile Sierra, as I remember. They had a V6, and the intake would get hot like that. On that one, it turned out to have a bad cam sensor. That was the strangest thing, unless it was squirting the fuel in there too soon and some of the fire was coming back into the intake, I don't know. But when we scoped everything and found the cam sensor wasn't putting out anything at all because it was all coming apart, we put a cam sensor and a pigtail and put it all back together, and that cooled that intake down and it idled a lot smoother too. But if you've got an EGR valve stuck open, it's going to idle rough, and the intake's going to get hot really fast. I'm talking about very soon. If you put your hand on that intake when one's idling rough and it starts to get really hot, you know exhaust gas is flowing through there. Lean air fuel mixture burns hot and fast. Just the way that is. And it'll make those spark plug ceramics super white and clean. It burns everything off of them. Like cleaning your oven. Which of the following are members of a planetary gear set? Sun gear, planetary gear, and ring gear. That's the right answer. However, a gear that's got teeth on the inside, like this outside gear, is referred to as an annulus gear. So remember that too. Alright, this is gauge temperature sensor failure. That's what it was. Alright, that winds up the video for this week, and I hope you guys really enjoyed it. We got about 30 minutes worth here, and I'll see you on the next time.